Mold, no big deal or harbinger of death? Today on the Landlord Coach Daily Ish Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Landlord Coach Daily Ish Show. My name is Mark Dolfini, Landlord Coach and host of the Landlord Coach Daily Ish Show. It's really good to see you. So today we are going to be talking about mold. No big deal or harbinger of death? So I know it's a ridiculous title, and it's certainly, I don't mean to make light of what could be a potentially serious situation, but it's if mold were to have a relationship status listed on Facebook, it would be checked off it's complicated, because there's lots of misinformation that's being passed around, and it's really, really frustrating, especially for those of us who are rental housing providers, and I totally get it. So we're going to talk about that today. Before we get started, too far down the road, if you are interested in some free stuff, you can check out some free videos. There's also some, if you are interested in getting a copy of this book, The Time Wealthy Investor 2.0, just asking for you just cover shipping, and we can get that sent out to you, Ricky Tick. So today we're talking about mold. No, not Nold. Mold. No big deal or harbinger of death. So again, it's that relationship status of it's complicated. if it was how to deal with mold, especially black mold, right? Now there's actually 12 different. I guess there's lots of different types of mold, but there's 12 different most common types of mold, and of course what everybody hears about is black mold, right? Well, that's the black mold. And I think this really started, I don't really actually know where this whole thing of mold started in terms of like how bad it could be in housing and our air quality and all this other stuff. And you could ask some people that like, hey, just treat it with some bleach, it's harmless, all the way up to it's practically plutonium. You can't go near it. It will eat your children and you will be forever sterile and your family line will end. And everything in between. And there's lots of problems which complicate this, which perpetuates this misinformation. And I want to talk a little bit about that today. So I remember it was probably back when I was maybe an early teenager, and you see those Dateline episodes that come up, and of course they scare the living crap out of you about everything that's out there. Like from one moment to the next, your kid's going to get abducted and sold off to slavery. To the next week, it's covering other things. Well, I remember this particular one in Dateline happened to be about black mold, about how dangerous it was for people, and people were having these respiratory problems and they couldn't figure it out, and then finally they moved, and all of a sudden it got better and they realized it was probably mold or whatever. So this became a thing, right? I remember this thing becoming a big thing, particularly it's like in the 70s or 80s, right? So this then like Clorox came out with these bleach sprays and Lysol, which basically kills all types of mold and all this other stuff, and so it just kind of perpetuated this continual discussion about how bad mold was, and that you can't be around it and all that other stuff. The fact of the matter is mold, like there are some people who have mold sensitivities. Let's just get that out of the way. Of course there are, and I'm not trying to diminish that, nor am I trying to also say it's the worst thing in the world. Mold occurs in nature. Mold is everywhere. And so I remember, when they started perpetuating these mold tests coming out, where you can buy them, and I think you can even buy them at your supermarket now. But I know you can buy them at your, Lowe's or whatever, your, where you could do a mold test. And it's funny that if something tests positive for mold, it's not that unusual. And where this really came up, it came up a few years ago, where I had a resident that called and said that they were having a mold problem, and I was like, okay. So I went down, and they did have like a significant mold problem. Like it was probably one of the worst mold problems that I ever seen. And what was happening was there was water, and I don't remember exactly the case. I think there might have been a busted drain line down in the basement, and it was all the water from this one particular wherever it was, it might have been the shower, was dumping directly into the basement. It was just that one. It just became detached. The PVC became detached, like the glue didn't quite set or whatever. So anyway, it became detached, and the water was pouring directly into the crawl space. Not anything that anybody would have ever noticed or even thought to check. Well, it was creating so much excessive humidity downstairs that it caused lots of mold problems in the living area. So I was like, man, this is just strange. Like, what is going on? What is causing all this excessive, there obviously had to come from somewhere. Obviously, mold loves humidity. And I was thinking, well, what's causing all this? So I went into the basement, found it, and that was obviously what was causing it. So once you fix that and you remove the humidity, now you have to treat for the mold. And it was like growing on the carpet, but it was just very, very strange. Well, it was admittedly beyond my pay grade in terms of how to deal with this. And I was like, how in the world do you deal with this? Because it was like, because there was just, the house was sitting on excessive moisture. Well, I got a mold remediator in there because I didn't want them living in that situation because, again, admittedly, it was kind of everywhere in the house. And again, it was just a very, very weird thing. But he's like, honestly, I mean, they did whatever they did. They were going to treat for and sprayed some stuff down. And it really wasn't that big of a deal. But the main thing was we had to stop the source of humidity. We had to stop, why the mold was there in the first place. So, any mold remediation isn't going to isn't going to amount to a hill of limas until you address the moisture issue, right? Which was obviously where that was coming from. So, of course, if they tested for mold, which I think that they did, I think that was what tripped all this off. And he was making a big fuss about it, which honestly, he had a right to be. I mean, it was kind of coming up all over. But again, it was no one's fault. It's just, we didn't know. And then, of course, when he called and we weren't there the next day, he made a big stink about it because I didn't know how big the issue was. Evidently, this had been going on for weeks, and he didn't tell us until it was a big problem. So we got down there. I think it was the second day. And then I was like, holy crap, dude, like, you can't be here. Like, I don't know if this is serious or not, but let's just get you figured out. And here's something that I heard. And I know someone's going to want to argue saying that they're a mold remediator and everything I'm saying is 100% wrong. That's why I'm being very careful in my answer here. But what was interesting, and I heard this from, I'm pretty sure I heard this from the, I'm trying to think of who it was. It might have been the health department, but that there was no standard for acceptable levels of mold in a dwelling. And I thought, that's really strange. He's like, well, the only way is they test the outside air quality, they test the inside air quality, and if they're markedly different, if the inside air quality is worse, then obviously that's something that you need to mitigate. But there really is no standard there's like no mold count that you could say. I mean, they could be growing mushrooms inside their house out of the carpet, and it's not anything that you could say is, like that needs to be corrected. This is part of the problem. This is part of the problem is because there's no standard for acceptable levels of mold. It's just treated or covered up or dealt with and then moved on. And there's no, from what I can see, from what I'm happy to admit that I'm wrong here, but I've done a ton of research on this, and people who've come to me through the years, there's no clear laws on how to deal with this, right? How to treat for it, like what's acceptable, what's not. The inspectors all have different opinions, from the city engineer's office to the health department, they all have different opinions on it. And even the mold remediators have different opinions on it. So it's, which could be anywhere from just treat it with some light bleach water, wipe it off, cover it with some Kills, repaint it, you're good to go, as long as it's surface mold. But if it's, or tear out all the drywall, remove anything that's ever looked like it's ever been wet ever, put in brand new, have it inspected, then cover it back up, have that inspected. I mean, and or just burn the entire house down because there's no way of getting around it. Like, it's just, there's so many different opinions on how it should all be treated. And again, like I said, if you worked for a mold remediation company, you're going to have your own processes and own procedures on how to deal with it. If you worked for a different one, you will have similar but also different in some ways to handle mold remediation. I've been through mold remediation training, and it was different from what the mold remediators were telling me. And I was thinking, what in the world? Now, granted, it's been a while since I did that. But some of them are practically saying, well, you've got to wear a hazmat suit, and it's like it's like the worst thing in the world. Don't breathe it. Don't let it get on your skin, and everything in between. So here's what I would suggest. And I never like to leave this thing like, I'm not telling you anything. If you've been through this, I'm not telling you anything that you probably already haven't been through. Or if you haven't been through it yet, it sucks. I'm just letting you know it does suck. The best thing that you can do is get with someone local that you trust. Like, get in front of these people before you need them. Make friends with a local mold remediator, someone with maybe like a service master franchise, Serve Pro, someone like that. That's someone that you can trust, that feels like that you can get good information from. The only problem with that is I would get in front of them before you need them, because some of them may be real free with information, others will not, and that just sucks, because sometimes you're just going to have to find out who's really going to give you good advice. I've got some great advice from some really good people, because I knew them personally, and they would loan me hydrometers or hydrostat or whatever they called it, but they would check all these the water levels, the humidity layer levels in the property, just to make sure that it wasn't too high, too low, or whatever. But it was just really, really interesting that getting their perspective as a certified mold remediator, like they could just say, like, look, honestly, if I was going to treat for this, this is how I would treat for it. Okay. Or not, or hey, or are they trying to write a check where a lot of that stuff, sometimes it's covered under insurance and sometimes it's not. And there are specific mold exclusion policies, or riders, mold riders that go onto policies. And if you've got mold exclusion, you may not have coverage for mold, and it can get really, really expensive. That's why a lot of these mold remediation companies also are in disaster restoration, because there's a lot of money to be made, and they're getting paid by the insurance companies for it. So, like I said, it's not easy. This is where it sucks, because you're not getting straight information from anybody. And of course, you may have a resident that's living there that's really good at social media and able to post all these photos of how you're making their babies live in this horrible situation. And it might even be in a situation that they caused. Not always, but maybe they're not, if they're running, showers and not opening the window or running the vent fans or something like that, that could be a significant, I have mold issues in my bathroom at times, and it's also because I'm not running the fan. But I also like really hot showers. I know I'm going to have to clean off the ceiling every now and again because there's going to be mold there. That's just part of life. It is. It's just prolific that way. But here's the thing. What I would suggest is, once you get all the information that you can get, which you can reasonably gather, have a mold policy in place. What is your mold policy? And have your mold policy written down. And if you even want to go a step further, have your mold policy written in your lease to say, if you're thinking that there's mold and it's determined to be surface mold, that's going to be your responsibility. If it's something due to a leak or something, from behind the wall, this is going to be our other mold policy. And, what is the policy going to be? Is this going to be an abatement of rent situation? Is this just going to be a partial abatement of rent because they couldn't use a certain part of the house? What is this going to be? Or is it going to be a, stopping of the lease, you move out so we can do the full remediation? What's it going to be? What's the mold policy going to be? Have that set up front. Have it set up front as best as you can, because when you're in the middle of it and emotions are flying and everybody's, upset, and you're not wanting to spend $10,000 on a mold remediation, which you really think could be handled with a can of Lysol and a bottle of bleach, I don't know. And you may not know either. But I'd say do the best you can to have a mold policy in place in advance. Because in the end of the day, this is a people business. Are there people with mold sensitivities? 100% true. Are there people who are going to take advantage of other people who have mold sensitivities? Absolutely true. And unfortunately, you just have to, treat them both the same. And you have to treat them both equitably and equally. So what I would say is remind yourself that you are in a people business. And how would you want to be treated? How would this happen? And just tell them, look, I want to do what's right by you. What is it that you're looking for? And sometimes that's all that they want to hear. So that's all I have for today. Hopefully you found this a little bit helpful, but not real solid answers. But unfortunately, this is always not straightforward. This is always not a straightforward business. Please be sure to place a value on your free time, because if you don't, someone else will. But most important, there is no amount of money that will make time irrelevant. I will see you next time.